Alfons Emilian writes, directs, stars, edits, produces Lechuza. This is a low-budget horror movie, as you've guessed, by a one-man band style production. It is clearly quite a low-budget movie, and I find this movie an interesting one to review because, I'll tell you now, I think this gets right what is possibly the hardest thing to do, but gets wrong more of the most basic things. So let me give you an idea of the plot, then we'll kind of get into it. It follows a family that it comprises of this uncle, played by our writer-director, and he's out with his niece and nephew and his kind of new girlfriend. And they are kind of going on a camping trip. And along the way, they basically encounter what looks to be like an old woman in kind of funeral attire who seems to be in some distress in the road. And they kind of stop to try and see if she's all right, but she just kind of seems aggressive towards them. And then they kind of go on to this kind of camping ground where they are harassed initially by something in the woods, and it appears to be appearing to the two children, and the adults kind of just put it down to the imagination. But there seems to be a winged demon in this forest that may well be something to do with this older woman. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. Now, what does this film get right? And why do I say it gets the hardest bit right? I think it gets the horror right, in a way. Maybe the horror is at odds with the context of the movie, but I think some of the kind of the scenes of horror, I think are actually, if you look at them in a bubble, are actually done quite well, considering this is clearly a very, very low budget movie. So we'll look at this in two kind of aspects. First of all, we have this kind of this woman, this older woman that we kind of first encounter. And this is just, you know, in like a black veil, scary looking. And the way she is acted, kind of flailing around like she's in distress, but at the same time kind of being quite aggressive. I found it quite disconcerting when you kind of look at this kind of scene and think, if you were in that position, how would you react? And you know, I actually thought, do you know what, that looks quite uncomfortable. You know, it kind of looks quite sort of like, ooh, it feels a little like, makes you feel a little bit like uneasy almost, because there's, you know, you're not quite sure, is it just like a gnarly old woman in this kind of veil, but she's, you kind of can see a little bit through the veil, and it looks, you know, looks like there's something else going on down there, and she's acting very aggressive and screaming and stuff. I thought that's pretty disturbing. If you were to come across that as a, you know, in real life, then I'd think, oh, that's pretty rough. And then we kind of get to the demonic kind of creature in the sort of forest, and again, for a low budget movie, it's pretty bestial. You know, it looks like a kind of gargoyle kind of style creature with massive teeth and wings and stuff. And I think there's some quite good like sound effects that this kind of creature has, kind of giving it this kind of eerie sound effect, and it's kind of out there in the woods, and again it sort of seems to be interested in these kids first, and you know, that was is it going to eat the kids, or what's its plans? And you know, there's even a bit at the end where we see it kind of fly and kind of grab someone, and I thought it's actually quite good for a low budget VFX. You know, I actually thought it looked pretty good. So, you know, I actually think the creature effects, the way this creature is filmed in the specific scenes where we see the creature, I think are good. Now, it loses some issues. It has some issues where it interacts with the rest of the film, which we'll come on to. But I just think if you were to see quick clips of this movie, you'd think, wow, that looks pretty good. The second thing I would say, not to do with anything to do with the creature, is I've got to say I didn't think the acting was too bad. Now, you've got these two young kids. The little girl is probably only around 5 or 6. But I gotta say, I thought she did a really good job. I actually thought it might be like an actual family member, and she's just kind of like acting with her kind of family member. But looking at the cast, no one's got the same surname, so I was like quite impressed with these two child actors, and even kind of, you know, are adults. Maybe sometimes they're not as good, but some of the times I actually do think the acting wasn't all that bad, if I'm honest. And in a way, it kind of feels, you know, this movie feels like more like, in a way, how people would actually act in a situation like this compared to how characters act in a movie. Now, that might sound like a positive in a way, and in some regards it is, because you kind of get this more raw panic sort of situation. But for a storytelling narrative, I think it's on the weaker side. Now let me transition to what doesn't work here. And as we've kind of talked about the characters and the acting, let me just kind of transition with that in mind. So the acting and the characters, our kids I think are fine. I no problem with the kids. The acting from our adults, I think for the most part is good. I think they kind of like poo-poo the kids a little bit too much, but that's more to do with the kind of the writing and the direction. But I think there is some of the line delivery is a little bit weaker with the some of our, you know, mainly our kind of writer director, if I'm honest. I think the actual female lead was a little stronger. The main issues with this story. There's two major issues with this story. Number one, the quality of the film is terrible. Now, initially it starts like it's going to be a found footage movie. We see this kind of camera and they're kind of filming stuff. But that sort of gets abandoned. And, you know, we see someone else kind of, you know, there's a camera filming in a traditional style. But the quality of the footage still feels like found footage, like it's low quality like film, if that makes sense. It looks like it's been filmed on like a 2010 era phone. It's constantly like moving around like it would be in a found footage movie. And then it's sort of some scenes I think it's meant to be found footage, but the majority of the scenes after the kind of initial introduction are meant to be like a traditionally filmed style film, but the filming style is more like found footage. Now, I think it would have been highly beneficial had they actually made this a complete found footage movie, because this 90% of this movie is like, it's meant to be like a traditionally filmed style film, but it has the quality of a found footage style film. So you get, as I say, grainy camera. We get wobbly camera all over the place when no one's like holding it and stuff, and some odd choices in regards to, you know, camera angles and how this kind of camera pans around people and things like that. So it really, it doesn't really work. The mechanics of this film, I think, are not particularly well handled and extremely low quality in regards to the technical elements here. Some of the sound design, again, this is why it would have benefited from being found footage. They're clearly not using particularly good mics, because like when someone's further away you could barely hear them and stuff like that. And if you're doing this as a found footage, you can kind of get away with that, but it isn't a found footage. So you can't really get away with that. So I think had this been a full found footage movie, a lot of the problems, at least with the technical elements, I think would have just been, you could have explained it away and almost be part of the story. But that wasn't the case. The other element here, there's really no story in this film. I mean, all it is this family getting harassed by supernatural creatures. We don't really know why. They don't seem to have crossed this kind of like old woman. They just seem to come across her. They even try and help her. But this thing just takes umbrage with them. Don't know why. It's never really addressed. I mean, it's like... And then all it is this family of four getting harassed in the woods. And that's it. That's it. There's no other kind of narrative threads in this movie. And what we get a lot of, it's a lot of kind of like dull, kind of like meandering scenes of looking around in the woods and things like this. And then just going back to a technical element. So I've mentioned that I think the actual horror elements are fairly well done. But they seem to be, in my opinion, they seem to have been filmed later and then edited into existing footage. Because when we see our kind of creature, it's almost like we get a rough edit, and then we'll see a scene of the creature, and then it's like, you know, our protagonists, you know, either looking through the woods or we see the camera on them. But the actual footage of these creatures seems to, in my opinion, looks like it's been like reshoots or something, and they've been added in because they don't quite match the kind of like the foliage and the sort of even the kind of like the quality of the film and stuff like that. It looks like a different. You know, all this was filmed at a different time in a different place, and it's been re-edited into the footage. So the technical elements of this movie are terrible. The actual narrative is non-existent. So this needed to have at least some story elements. You know, we follow this family, we get to know them. They cross this woman for some reason or another. You know, they get, you know, it's basic stuff. They're going to go into the forest, and we needed someone else to come across it to kind of give you a little bit more of what's going on and stuff. And then we need to know what this creature is. Is there a way to defeat it? You know, do they get close to kind of like finding a resolution? And then ultimately, you know, things happen the way that they happen in the movie. But it's none of that. It's just like lots of harassment from this kind of thing in the woods. And that's it. You know, so... You know, it's an odd choice because I feel so much effort has been put into making some scary imagery that I think is done very well. And I say the acting isn't bad, but it's just in a real low quality technical production and really no story in it. I mean, I don't know the making of this film or how it came to be, but it seemed to me that it needed more time. It needed maybe a producer. I mean, I don't think it needed more budget necessarily, because the most expensive things are the creature effects, and they were done well. But they needed to be incorporated into the film better. The story needs to be a bit more kind of, well, there needs to be a story. And for Christ's sake, if you've spent the money on these creature effects, get a better camera, get mics, get a boom mic. Overall, though, you know, some good creature sequences do not make for a good movie overall. I will give it a 4 out of 10 because I do appreciate some of the sequences and the scary imagery that it's produced. And I'll give credit to these kind of the actors where, you know, who I actually didn't think they did a bad job, even though they have really nothing to do. There's no storyline. There's not a lot of script here. So 4 out of 10. It is a below average movie, but I do think it has a few elements there that I think, you know, this movie could have been so much better had it been a little bit more, maybe, you know, this is always the problem when you get one person in charge, you know. You needed someone else to have some oversight, you know, a little bit more time taken to it. Anyway, 4 out of 10. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you next time.